Have you ever been in the woods at night and felt like the trees weren't just standing there, but watching? Not the wind, not an animal, something aware. Tonight, I'm telling you 3 true-to-life stories from people who thought they were spending one quiet night alone with nature and found out, in the worst way possible, that they weren't alone at all. If you're watching this alone, at night, with the lights off, good. That's exactly how these stories are meant to be heard. Let's get into it.
It was supposed to be a simple trip. 4 friends, Derek, Casey, Mark, and Jenna, had been planning this camping weekend for months. Nothing extreme. A state forest 3 hours outside of town, a spot they'd found on a hiking forum, far enough off the main trail that they'd have the whole ridge to themselves. Just 4 people, 2 tents, a cooler of beer, and a weekend away from cell service. They set up camp just before sunset, right at the edge of a small clearing surrounded by dense pine. The kind of place that looks like something out of a postcard during the day and something else entirely once the sun goes down. They built their fire, cooked hot dogs on sticks, and told the usual stories people tell in the woods, the ones you tell because some primal part of your brain needs to make the dark feel smaller. It was Casey who noticed it first.
Around 11 p.m., she got up to grab another beer from the cooler and looked out past the tree line, down into the valley below their campsite. And there, maybe half a mile away, through the gaps in the trees, she saw a flicker of orange light. "Guys, there's another fire out there." The others looked. Sure enough, deep in the woods, far from any marked trail, there was a small campfire burning. No tents visible, no flashlights moving around it. Just the fire, sitting still in the dark, like it had always been there. "Maybe it's rangers," Mark said. "Or hunters. There's no trail down there," Derek said. He'd studied the map obsessively before the trip. It was kind of his thing. "That's not even close to a trail. That's just woods." They didn't think much more of it. People camp in strange places. Maybe it was hunters who knew a hidden clearing. Maybe it was hikers who'd gotten lost and decided to hunker down for the night. Either way, it wasn't their problem.
They went back to their own fire, their own conversation, and eventually their own tents. Jenna was the one who couldn't sleep. She said later that something about the fire had bothered her, not because it was scary, but because it felt wrong somehow, like a word spelled almost correctly. She unzipped her tent around 1 a.m. to look at it again. It was closer, not by a little. The fire that had been half a mile down in the valley was now maybe 200 yards from their camp, glowing between the trees at the edge of visibility. And this time, she said, she could see a silhouette near it. Just one, standing very still, facing away from her, facing the fire. She woke up Derek. The 2 of them stood at the edge of the campsite and watched. The figure by the distant fire hadn't moved. Derek grabbed his flashlight and pointed it out into the dark, and the second the beam swept across the trees in that direction, the fire went out. Not faded, not died down. It was there, and then, in an instant, it wasn't. Like someone had reached down and pinched it out between 2 fingers. They didn't sleep much after that. Nobody wanted to say the word out loud, but they were all thinking it. Something out there had been watching their camp, and it knew exactly when it had been seen. The next morning, things got worse in a quieter, more unsettling way. Casey found her missing earring, the one she'd lost on the hiking trail the day before, nearly 2 miles back, sitting neatly on a flat rock at the edge of their camp. Not dropped, not tossed, placed deliberately in the center of the stone, like an offering on an altar. Mark found his water bottle, the one he'd left behind at the trailhead parking lot. sitting forgotten on the hood of his car when they'd unloaded their gear. It was now resting against the base of a tree 6 feet from his tent, the cap screwed on tight. And Derek found his pocket knife, the one that had fallen out of his jacket somewhere on the trail during a bathroom break the previous afternoon, a full 3 miles from where they were now camped. It was stuck upright in the dirt, blade down, directly in front of the tent flap, like it had been planted there.
"Someone's messing with us," Mark said, but his voice didn't have any confidence in it. Nobody had followed them. Nobody had known which campsite they'd chosen. They'd picked it randomly off a forum post that morning. And even if someone had followed them, how would they have known to collect items lost across 3 miles of trail, items the group themselves hadn't even realized were missing until they saw them again? That's the detail that still bothers Jenna to this day. They hadn't noticed the water bottle was missing. They hadn't noticed the earring was gone. Whatever, or whoever, had been watching them had been paying closer attention to their group than they had been paying to themselves. They packed up before noon. Nobody suggested staying another night. It wasn't even a conversation.
As they hiked out, Derek said he kept feeling like the trees on either side of the trail were thinner than they remembered from the hike in, like the path had narrowed, funneling them forward faster than they were walking. At the trailhead, loading the car, Casey turned around to take one last look at the woods. And for just a second, way off at the tree line, half hidden by shadow, she said she saw the outline of a person standing there, watching them leave. She didn't tell the others until they were an hour down the highway, windows up, radio on, putting as much distance between themselves and that forest as the car would allow. To this day, none of them can explain how someone, or something, found 3 separate items lost across 3 miles of wilderness and returned them, one by one, directly to their tents. And none of them have gone back to that ridge since. Because whatever left those things behind wasn't trying to scare them away. It was showing them it could have taken something else instead. Some people camp for the company. Others camp to get away from it entirely. Ryan was the second kind. A solo backpacker in his late 20s, the kind of guy who genuinely preferred a weekend alone in the mountains to a weekend around other people. He'd done dozens of solo trips before, knew how to read weather, how to hang a bear bag, how to sit with silence without it getting to him. If you'd asked him before that trip whether he got scared camping alone, he would have laughed at you. He picked a backcountry site in a national forest, about 6 miles in from the trailhead, along a ridge with a view that made the hike worth it. He set up his one-person tent in a small flat clearing bordered by dense brush on 3 sides, cooked a quiet dinner, watched the stars come out, and crawled into his sleeping bag a little after 10 p.m., tired in the good way, the way you only get tired after a full day outdoors. He woke up sometime after 2 a.m. to the sound of breathing, not his own, not wind. Not an animal snuffling around a campsite looking for food. He knew what that sounded like, and this wasn't it. This was slow, deliberate, heavy breathing, coming from directly outside the tent wall, close enough that with every exhale, he could see the fabric of the tent shift just slightly, like breath was actually pushing against it. He lay perfectly still. Every instinct told him not to move, not to make a sound, to wait it out and hope it was a deer, a bear, anything with 4 legs that would eventually lose interest and wander off. The breathing didn't stop. It didn't get closer. It didn't get farther. It just continued, steady and patient, like whatever was making it had all the time in the world and nowhere else to be. After what felt like 20 minutes, but was probably closer to 5, Ryan made a decision he still regrets. He reached over, slowly, and grabbed his flashlight. He didn't turn it on right away. He held it there, in the dark, thumb on the switch, telling himself that the second he clicked it, whatever was out there would either run off or he'd see something he couldn't unsee. He turned it on anyway. The beam lit up the inside of the tent, and through the thin nylon wall, he saw it, a silhouette, human-shaped, or close to it, tall, broad-shouldered, standing upright about 2 feet from the tent wall. And it wasn't moving. It wasn't reacting to the light at all. It was just standing there, head slightly tilted downward, facing directly at the spot where Ryan's head was, as if it had known exactly where he was lying the entire time, even in pitch darkness. He said the worst part wasn't the shape itself. It was how still it was. Not the stillness of someone frozen in surprise, caught off guard by the sudden light. This was the stillness of someone who had been standing there for a long time already, and intended to keep standing there for a while longer, completely unbothered by being seen. He didn't shout. He didn't ask who was there. His body simply refused to do anything except grip the flashlight and stare at the shadow on the wall, waiting for it to move first. It didn't. Not for what he estimated was almost 2 full hours. At some point, exhaustion and adrenaline crash into each other in a strange way, and Ryan says he must have drifted in and out, because the next clear thing he remembers is the breathing sound changing. It got lower, rougher. And then, for just a moment, he heard something that broke him out of his frozen stillness completely. A second sound of breathing, coming from a different direction. Not beside the first one, behind the tent. 2 sources, 2 rhythms, slightly out of sync with each other, coming from opposite sides of a one-person tent barely wide enough for his sleeping bag. That's when the silhouette on the wall finally moved. Not away, but down, slowly crouching, lowering itself toward the ground, the way something might lower itself to look through a gap in the tent floor. Ryan didn't wait to find out. He grabbed his boots, unzipped the tent as fast as his hands would let him, and half ran, half stumbled out into the dark, flashlight swinging wildly, screaming, his word, like an animal. There was nothing there, no shape, no silhouette, no second set of footprints in the soft dirt around the tent that he could identify as separate from his own, though he admits he wasn't exactly doing careful forensic examination at 3 in the morning while barefoot and panicking. He spent the rest of the night sitting upright against a tree with his knife in one hand and his flashlight in the other, watching the tree line until the sky started to lighten. In the morning, in the daylight, with birds singing like nothing had happened, he almost convinced himself he'd dreamed it. Almost. Then he looked at the outside of his tent wall, the exact spot where the silhouette had stood. There was a faint, greasy handprint on the nylon, too large to be his own, positioned at a height that meant whatever left it had been crouching, exactly the way the shadow had appeared to crouch in that final moment before he ran. He packed up and hiked the 6 miles out in under 2 hours, a hike that normally took him 3.5. He hasn't done a solo overnight since, and when people ask him why, he doesn't tell the whole story anymore. He just says the woods stopped feeling empty to him after that night. They felt occupied.
If you've watched my videos before, you already know how I feel about relying on GPS in the backcountry. I've told the story about the hiker whose navigation app tried to walk him straight into a ravine. This story is different. This one is about a man named Tom and what happened when his GPS started telling him the truth. A truth he really didn't want to hear. Tom was an experienced hiker, the kind who normally didn't need a GPS at all, but he'd bought a handheld unit for a solo trip into unfamiliar terrain, a remote wooded area a few states over. recommended to him by a friend who swore the fall colors were unbeatable. He parked his car at a small pull-off on a Forest Service road, marked the coordinates on his GPS as a waypoint, labeled simply car, and set off on foot into the trees around 1 p.m., expecting a leisurely 4-hour loop before heading back well before dark.
By 4 p.m., the light was already starting to fade faster than he expected. The kind of premature dusk you get under a thick, unbroken canopy, and Tom decided to cut the hike short and head straight back to his car. He pulled up the GPS, selected the car waypoint, and started following the little arrow pointing him back the way he'd come. That's when things started feeling wrong. The arrow told him the car was 0.6 of a mile away, roughly northeast. He walked in that direction for what should have taken him 12, maybe 15 minutes. When he checked again, the arrow still read 0.6 of a mile. Same direction. He told himself it was a GPS glitch, dense canopy interfering with the satellite signal, which does happen. He kept walking. 5 more minutes. He checked again. 0.7 of a mile. Now moving away from the car, according to the device, despite the fact that he hadn't changed direction at all. Tom is not a panicker. He's the type who trusts process over instinct. So, instead of getting anxious, he did what any careful hiker would do. He stopped, took a breath, and recalculated his bearing using the compass function, correcting his course to head more directly northeast, cutting through slightly thicker brush to make up the difference. The woods around him were getting denser, not gradually, noticeably, step by step, like the trail he thought he remembered walking in on had never existed in this direction at all. Branches he didn't recall pushing past on the way in, underbrush thick enough that he had to angle his shoulders sideways to move through it. He told himself terrain always looks different walking the opposite direction in worse light, and that's normally true, but this didn't feel like different. It felt like wrong. At 4:40, with maybe 45 minutes of usable daylight left, he checked the GPS one more time, fully expecting the distance to finally start dropping. It read 1.1 miles. Direction? Due south. The opposite direction from where he'd started this entire correction. And underneath the distance and bearing, where the little status line usually displayed satellite signal strength or battery percentage, there was a message. You are not alone. Look behind you. Tom said he read it 3 times before his brain would accept that it was actually there, printed on the little gray screen in the same plain font as every other system message the device had ever shown him. GPS units don't do this. They show coordinates, elevation, battery life, distance to waypoint. They do not display warnings. They do not know what's behind you.
He turned around anyway, because some instructions, however impossible, your body follows before your mind finishes arguing with them. There was nothing behind him, just trees, going back as far as the fading light let him see, and the kind of total, layered silence you only get deep in a forest at dusk. No birds, no wind, no insects. The kind of silence that feels less like an absence of sound and more like something is actively holding its breath. He looked back down at the screen. The message was gone. Distance to waypoint, 1.1 miles. Direction due south, like nothing had happened at all. Tom did the only thing he could think to do. He started moving south, fast, no longer trying to reason his way through what was happening to the device, just trusting the numbers, because the numbers were the only thing he had left to trust. The brush thinned slightly. His legs were burning. Twice he heard something moving in the undergrowth to his left, matching his pace almost exactly, staying just far enough into the tree line that he couldn't make out a shape,
only a shifting darkness where the shadows seemed a fraction too solid, moving a fraction too smoothly to be branches in the wind. He didn't stop to look. He'd already decided, somewhere in the animal part of his brain, that looking was the one thing he wasn't allowed to do. The GPS distance dropped. 0.9 miles, 0.6, 0.3. And just as the last real light was draining out of the sky, he broke through a wall of low pine branches, and there it was, the Forest Service Road, and his car, sitting exactly where he'd left it, headlights catching the last silver light of dusk like the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. He didn't look back into the tree line before getting in.
He didn't check his mirrors until he was a full mile down the forest road, tires kicking up gravel, hands shaking on the wheel. Later, safely home, unable to sleep, Tom plugged the GPS into his computer to check the trip log, partly out of morbid curiosity, partly because he needed proof, some external confirmation that any of it had actually happened the way he remembered it. The trip log was normal. A clean, sensible track showing him walking out and looping back. No strange doubling, no impossible detours. Nothing that matched the disorienting, looping panic he remembered living through in real time. Except for one thing. At 4:40 p.m., the exact minute he remembered seeing the message on the screen, there was a 2-minute gap in the recorded data. No coordinates logged, no elevation, no movement tracked at all. As if, for 2 full minutes, the device had simply stopped recording his position entirely. As if, for 2 minutes, wherever Tom was standing in those woods, the GPS didn't want to say. He hasn't used that unit since. It sits in a drawer, batteries removed. And every time someone brings up hiking in unfamiliar woods, he tells them the same thing. Bring a paper map as backup. Not because GPS units fail, because sometimes, he says, they work exactly as they're supposed to, and tell you something true you were never meant to hear.
If there's one thing all 3 of these stories have in common, it's this. The deep woods have never actually been empty. We just like to tell ourselves they are, because the alternative is a lot harder to sleep next to. If this video kept you a little too alert tonight, hit subscribe. I post a new set of true horror stories every week, and trust me, the woods have a lot more to say. Stay safe out there, and maybe check behind you before you turn off that flashlight.